if you want. So, welcome back, and thank you very much, everyone, for your time and contributions during the first half of the of our presentation. So we put up the questions that we wanted to discuss. We wanted to have discussion groups so that we have your presentation and contribution to the report, to the questions and findings and recommendations that we have. I just wanted to make a short statement. So although I did share with you the summary of the report yesterday via email, I did mention that this is a working document format. And although our aim was to launch the findings and recommendations today, as I mentioned during my presentation, our aim is also to have as many views and inputs as possible from all of you. And before we go and publish the report, we would like and appreciate very much your input and feedback on any aspect of the report that we have, and including recommendations. Before we move on, onto the discussion within the groups, I must remind you that the regional report was based on the national assessments, which have not yet been published. But I explained to you perhaps, which slide was it? But So the process of the assessment, which was very long ago, but the process of assessment, which starts with the establishment of a multi-stakeholder advisory board. And this was the case for all 5 countries of the study in the South Pacific. So we started with the establishment of multi-stakeholder advisory board, and I think in the South Pacific Islands we had more people invited to join in into the MAB than in any other countries. Of course, not all of the members were able to join, but we have reached out to tens of people. And when I say we, it's the national teams. And the findings, the data was collected and guided by the National Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Board members, but in addition also from different national stakeholders which did not necessarily have the time to be part of the MAB, but they kindly helped and guided the data collection. And what's also important, as I said, these national reports are we encourage very strongly the national ownership, and these reports are national products. And each of the national reports, both the findings and recommendations, have been validated by the National Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Board. They have also been circulated among wider stakeholder groups, among the people who weren't able to be part of the multi-stakeholder advisory group. And we have incorporated every input that we received from national stakeholders to the report. The national reports, I'm talking about the national reports. The regional report then drew on the data and the recommendations that were validated by the national stakeholders. So we moved on to the regional report only after we had all national reports validated by the national stakeholders and multi-stakeholder advisory board members. So just to clarify this, and the regional report draws on these national reports validated by the national stakeholders. So we observed all the steps except for the impact assessment, because it's too soon to assess the impact. So this is just a clarification and a reminder to please not circulate the working document that has been shared with you before UNESCO publishes it, because UNESCO needs to publish it first, and then you can disseminate, circulate, and use it in the way you want. Of course, observing the copyright and everything. So if anyone has any questions at this point about the process or the report, I'm happy to take it. If not, I wanted to invite, because we have two of the researchers here, I wanted to invite Doreen and Swaran to talk about how they went forward and how they completed the assessment in their countries. And if anybody of you who was part of the multi-stakeholder advisory board or who contributed to the assessment would like to share their experience before we move on to the discussion, please feel free. Who wants to start? Doreen, Swaran.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Doreen. Like you all know, it's printed here on the tag. Good afternoon. Well, I wear a lot of hats. I am part of the Smart Sisters. Smart Sisters, you would know, it's an NGO organization in Vanuatu that we promote STEM in girls in ICT. And then I also had more than 10 years of experience with telecom industry and telecom regulators office. And then I am currently working for projects, climate change projects. I was selected by UNESCO to be part of this lead research because of my experience in telecommunications and also my network with the stakeholders. In fact, I think it's the Fiji team that were part of the initial arrangement with UNESCO. Once that was approved, and then we were selected from different countries, 5 countries. So I was one of them from Vanuatu. The process that we had followed was the process that UNESCO had, it's all written in that IUI multi-stakeholder advisory board. It's all how we follow the process to collect the data and establish a multi-advisory stakeholder board meeting committee. It was all written in this IUI study, research study. So once we were appointed by UNESCO, it's a voluntary work, so once we were appointed in each of our country, like for my country in Vanuatu, I had to select the members of the MAP, Multi-Advisory Stakeholder Board Committee. And these are telecom operators, government ministries, and NGOs who are directly involved contributing to development of internet in the country, and also users like the NGOs, the civil society, human rights organizations. They're also part of this MAP committee. And once they were all informed or briefed about what their role is into this study, and then they were the ones that were helping me to collect the data. So I would be doing all the writings according to the framework that has been presented by Simon and Tatefik, but based on the data that they give me. So whatever that I can't find, then I would do my own research. But otherwise, that's the process that we had followed. So, and then we also had MAP workshops. We had about 2, like in my country, Vanuatu, I had 2 MAP workshops. The first one is to brief them about what I'm expected from them. And then the next one is the validation workshop, in which they were part of having to review all the recommendations that is in the national report. So my report also, because I had also shared it with some donor partners, and they had contributed a lot in the recommendations because they had their experience internet in the country as well. They are users, and they know what the status of internet is like in Vanuatu. So they also contribute into the recommendations. So, and then the report is submitted to UNESCO, so it's the UNESCO that is going through different processes of reviewing to have it finalized. So I think that's how we were involved, and the process we were part of this UNESCO IOI report, Internet Landscape Report for the Pacific Island countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Thank you for the excellent work done, and thank you to all the multi-stakeholder advisory board members who actively engaged, and we were there in Vanuatu and inspired to see also the other people, stakeholders who came and contributed and owned to the recommendations and their implementation, onto leading the implementation. And Swaran, I would also like to invite you to share your experience, please.
Thank you, Tadevik. Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone, once again. First of all, I feel very honored to be standing here and also expressing some of the findings. And listen, I have had sort of a walkabout, and I'm a person who speaks very frankly, so pardon me if I may say something that may upset you. But what I generally feel is that there are some differing opinions, and we are absolutely happy to take them on board. But what we essentially want here is this report to be owned by the Pacific. Yes, UNESCO is perhaps the custodian of the report. The framework was formulated by UNESCO, and we are very appreciative of that. But let's remember, the report belongs to the country. That means it is still a working document. If there's any aspect of the report that you would like to refute, please be my guest. I'm happy to work with you. Doreen is happy to work with you. So is Simon. Now, having said that, I just wanted to sort of summarize what the process was like. So this started in, I think, for me personally, in 2020, when I saw the ROMEX framework for the very first time. At that point in time, I think the assessments were only up to Rome. X wasn't there. So I was a fellow, and Anju has been very instrumental in getting this project happening in the Pacific Islands. So yes, so this happened for me personally. I was an online fellow back then for APIGF, and my presentation, or rather the key takeaway of APIGF, was bringing ROMEX or something equivalent so we can have some objective data to really have some introspective and find out where can we improve. So the ROMEX project on Internet Universality Indicators is essentially a project that stems from the basic principle of human rights, that the human rights that we as citizens are able to practice offline should be the same that we practice online. That is the basic driving force that we used to do the assessments. So there were 5 countries initially that took up the project, and Doreen was the lead researcher for Vanuatu. We had Mele and Selu for Tonga, and I authored the report for Fiji, Solomon Islands, and Tuvalu. But all the 4 women who were leading the research, trust me, every part of the project was visible to all the MEB members, and it still is, if you'd like us to share it with you. In Fiji's, for example, in Fiji's case, we had 25 MEB members, and every sector was represented. Right? So the report was accessible to everyone. So the format of the report was as such. There were indicators, there were direct questions, which required direct answers. Now, personally for me, because I did my master's by thesis, and I'm currently also studying my PhD, so I strongly believe in concrete research methods. I am a believer of qualitative information. So the type of work, I've also worked with Professor Sharma on the Right to Information project, which is, I think this is our 4th year in Right to Information, and of course, it is part of the anti-corruption project, so you can understand what sort of work it involves. So coming from that perspective, when I started doing this research, to be honest, initially, I had a bit of confusion, because I was thinking, if this is research, what sort of methodologies are we using? That's when we were reassured by UNESCO that this is an assessment. Whatever questions are there, those things are either there or they're not. So there were times when I picked up information from ITU, for example. And I was told by Simon, okay, ITU is there, please go back to Ministry of Communications and ask them what do they say? Contrary to what ITU may have published. Now, the reality of the Pacific is we still have a chronic problem of working in silos. That is something we really need to work on, right? For example, in Solomon Islands, if you go search up data on the World Bank's site, APNIC's site, you will see data that is as old as 2019. And in the IT field, that is dinosaur age, right? So that was some of the predicaments we faced, which is why we strongly rely on the multi-stakeholder advisory board members to give us your perspectives. So I just wanted to reassure you that the document is still a working document. If you would like to refute any segment, we are happy to take that on. If you would like to give us some supplementary data to put into that assessment, we are happy to do that as well. Now, I do realize that when we see the sub-regional report here as a team, of course, I mean, for me as a Fijian, I would say, hey, that doesn't happen in Fiji. I mean, it's common, and I'm completely with you. Sorry, guys, but I'm completely with you if you're going to tell me that, no, that doesn't happen in Fiji. We need to be mindful we have matriarchal structures and patriarchal structures in the Pacific Island, in the South Pacific Islands alone. So some of the statements we may make right now, this is just a generalized perspective. It may not be presented in a synthesis document format as what we do for IGF or APRI-IGF, but it is still a working document. Please feel free to tell us what you feel. If you want me to share the reports, what we can do maybe from here onwards is we can have working groups. We can have one team for Fiji, one for Tuvalu, one for Solomon Islands, one for Tonga, and one for Vanuatu. And we're happy to show you the entire report all over again, and you can tell us what you feel. If you feel anything is wrong there, I'm not going to say this is yes, this is right. I'm not going to say that. None of us can say that. You are the owners of the report. You are the ones who are the members. You own the data. Contrary to what ITU or APNIC may publish, and that is perhaps one of my greatest experiences in this project. So we started in maybe October. One of the lessons I personally learned, and I had to also maybe discuss this with the UNESCO's team, let's not start thinking about starting a project in October, because by the time we have a team ready, it's almost Christmas time, we don't want to work. We don't, right? So anyway, so having said that, I've had some conversations with many of you. I totally appreciate your feedback, but what I would greatly appreciate is if you could please be part of the system, work with us. What Doreen, myself, Selu and Mele, and many of you know that Mele is a statistician by profession, right? We only have the information that was provided to us, but many times we were told we have to go back to the agencies, go back to the organizations, ask them what they say about this, not what ITU says. That is the level of ownership that the report will allow. So it won't be published till we all have enough information and input in it. But having said that, there is a certain time period, right? So we could allow, maybe Tervik would be able to reiterate on the timelines and up to what, how much time do we really have, even if we would allow, even if we were to allow people to give in their final say. So do you think you'd like to work in that approach? We have working groups, what time is it now? Oof, we don't have much time.
So thanks very much, Swaran, and thank you so much for your energy and drive. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of time, an energy of 10 people to lead a research in not one country, but 3 countries. And you've done an excellent job, and also in bringing everyone together and getting so many views on board and really ensuring multi-stakeholder perspective. And I must say that we had truly multi-stakeholder group in every country. So I think, so we did have a lot of feedback and the report was validated. But however, we will be open to receiving feedback if there are any, but considering that we really had multi-stakeholder approach and all the views have been taken into account, perhaps you could share the report with people who are still interested to contribute and who haven't necessarily seen the report, perhaps by the, what are we now? we can give them 2 weeks. We can give you 2 weeks to just give any feedback that you may feel you want to share or any input, because the work has been done over a year and through a thorough research. So I think if anybody has anything to add. And just to explain what will happen after that, we do have a multi-stakeholder approach. The report belongs to the countries. The UNESCO provides guidance. UNESCO gets its mandate from member states, and each of your countries are member states of UNESCO who have given us the mandate to work on this, who have endorsed this framework. So we're an intergovernmental organization. So afterwards, we will be sharing the report with the ministry in charge or the entity in charge. So for Tonga, it would be Andrew. For Tuvalu, it would be Opet. For Vanuatu, CIO's office. So we will share it as an intergovernmental organization with the ministry or entity in charge. And then we will have the summary reports, national reports published. And then the entity in charge will decide to publish the full report. Just to be fully transparent, this is the process. As far as the regional report is concerned, so we can have 2 weeks to receive the feedback, and UNESCO will then move on with publishing the regional report, because it is based on the national reports that have been validated and will receive additional feedback from you. But what we wanted to do today is exactly what happened, perhaps what you received as feedback in the corridor, or I don't know. This is exactly why we're having this session, to have feedback from you. And ideally, we wanted to divide you into groups to have the discussion and perhaps have your presentation or share your thoughts on how to improve the report or what to incorporate. Do we have time? We do have some time.
Maybe in the essence of time, what we can do at this stage is just register your interest, and then we can work with you in a group or individually, maybe not here.
Yes, but we still have 45 minutes. If everyone agrees, we had an extensive presentation on the main findings. What I would suggest is if you would like to have a discussion within maybe 3 groups, and we would leave it up to you to, leave it up to you to discuss for individual in different groups. They could discuss in 10-15 minutes and have a 5-minute presentation each. This was our plan, but if you feel like, because I feel like there was quite a few discussions, and it would be very helpful to have your feedback heard by everyone.
It would be wrong for us to generalize, the 5 countries. So if there's something happening very differently in Fiji, of course, it may not be the same for Tonga or the Solomons.
But this is analyzed and presented in the full report, so it is clarified, no? So I will leave it to you to divide yourselves, please. 15 minutes
Can we just
discussion
have a
and
final
5-minute
look?
presentation. So you have the printouts. So do you want to lead one group? Doreen will lead one group.
Okay. I can lead Fiji's group.
But not just Fiji, not just Fiji. If they have Fiji, because to have an open mic, and anyone who wants to avoid internal discussion and speak up, please. Feel free to approach the microphone. Yes, please.
Can I? Sorry, I've got a really sore throat. Result of 2 a.m. Being pushed out of the thing. Can I just make a suggestion? There are, I think, about 19 recommendations in a report. Rather than having a country by country specifically look at the report, why don't we look at, because you have done the collection of the data, you make the recommendation. Just wondering whether there is something that is really pertinent in the 19 recommendations there that you wanted all the countries to have. And if that is the case, what are those, one out of the 19 itself, so that we can talk about that, and then we can go home and start thinking of how we're going to be implementing the recommendation. That's only a suggestion from somebody who only attended one of those workshops. And I've been given the report to have a look at all of those things. And I like the idea that you thematically group the recommendations. Just wondering, because you were the one that were doing the work right throughout the 5 countries, what is the thing that stand out the most, in your recommendation that you would like all the countries to implement? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you so much for your role in advancing the assessment in Tonga personally. So forgive me if I didn't understand your question correctly, but so this regional report and the recommendations that we shared with you yesterday, and that we also gave out the printaways, this is exactly what we did. We do have 5 national reports which were envisaged, and we will have them separately, but based on these reports we have this regional report and the recommendations. So the regional report looked at the situation based on, again, Romex principles, and summarized the situation in all of these countries, and it's just an analysis. And based on this analysis, all of these 19 recommendations are for all countries. It's regional recommendations, but it can be applied in some cases because the focus of our project is South Pacific. We focus a lot on the South Pacific, but Simon mentioned in his analysis that this can be applicable also to other countries in the region. So these 19 recommendations are already the recommendations, the sort of sub-regional recommendations that are applicable for all 5 countries rather than individual countries. I don't know if this was your question. Did you understand it differently?
Yeah, I do understand that it's a regional recommendations, but because you were the people that were doing the study, we didn't. Out of the 19 recommendations, what is one thing out of those that you think that should be prioritized, perhaps? That is common right throughout the region.
Yes.
So what would be 1 or 2 of those things itself? Because I know that a whole lot of us, in the countries, we are not going to implement the 19, straight away. But if there is something that is really pertinent, something that is really important for us to take home in this from this Pacific IGF, what would that be?
Thank you very much. This is exactly the question we wanted to ask you, because you said it's a report done by us, but I should remind that it's a report done by the countries, and the recommendations were formulated by the countries, and it's a question that we want to ask you, and this was the purpose of the breakout groups. And we cannot decide for you what is a priority recommendation for you. We want to ask you, all of you, we have all these 19 recommendations. Okay, we had the questions if we had more time to discuss, but this is a question to ask to you because you know the situation better, you know your priorities better, and you should be the ones to tell what are the priorities for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you essentially want to know is what were some of the common findings across the 5 countries. Okay, so the absence of a privacy act, serious concerns around intellectual property, data sovereignty, and there was questions about the Cybercrimes Act, the Lack of Information Act. So these were some of the things that we found common. Of course, for example, in Vanuatu, I must say the legal regulatory framework was in many cases much better than Fiji. But having said that, we had the Information Act 2018, which was an enabler for many other things. So if there was 1 or 2 things that we would comment on, it would probably be the absence of the Cybercrimes Act, the absence of a Privacy Act, the absence of intellectual property regulation. Those were some of the primary concerns.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we can take it home and we'll say, let's work on that, for Tonga, for example. So
Thank you for
Andrew
saying-
here from the government, I think he's got his own homework to take home. Thank you.
But thanks very much for clarifying this, Warren. But I want to ask, okay, including you, Andrew,
Okay.
because you've been so closely involved, we want to hear you because it's your report, it's your findings, it's your recommendations. What's the priority for you?
I want to trigger some discussion, that's all. So, one of the things that I think for Vanuatu, one of the recommendations is National Internet Governance Forum. So I think it is more relevant to talk about that in here because these people might go away and start setting up their National Internet Governance Forum, which would be more relevant to this discussion. So tell us more about that. I mean, if they want, I think it's in some of the recommendations that you have. How will you assist in facilitating this to the global IGF? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So this was a recommendation in, I think, many of the countries. For Vanuatu, we spoke with the CIO, and he identified this as an absolute priority recommendation. So what we did, and we had the same recommendation, which was also welcomed by Tonga, Tuvalu. This was vividly, expressively something that they wanted to take up on. So what we, as UNESCO, did is we have excellent working relationship with IGF Secretariat, and it's their mandate to support national IGFs. But considering that the recommendation came from us, we had a dialogue with the IGF Secretariat. We had a dialogue with you guys and you, the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Board, and the CIO's office have identified the people who would be talking with the IGF Secretariat to establish it. And we have facilitated the discussion. So if it's a priority for you and then IGF Secretariat who has the mandate, then you take it from there. We facilitated this discussion among representatives from Tuvalu and Tonga between the IGF Secretariat and these countries who were interested. So from our end, what we can do is facilitate this discussion and get you started with it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tejeshwari. I'm representing the Online Safety Commission. Great to hear your recommendations with regards to Online Safety Commission and plus from the general public, but it would be good to understand what exactly were the complaints on how we can foster an inclusive process to understand the solutions. Now, my first point is, have we picked up the Online Safety Act to see what all mandates and functions are? So the Act mandate is what we are fulfilling currently, and we do note that our limitations are there. However, with approximately 943,000 people in Fiji, we have 5 people at the Online Safety Commission to fulfill those functions. to note that we are also currently working on building more people on board and perhaps the legislation review afterwards. My third point is that we have a very trusted relationship with the platforms like Meta and TikTok. However, not every request can be facilitated. Higher-end issues like image-based abuse and sextortions are prioritized. With issues such as simple things like blocking a user or avoiding further communications with the user is something that is advised to the complainants. I also understand that we do not have powers to prosecute matters in court, but we do have a memorandum of understanding with the Fiji Police Force to further investigate and prosecute matters. For example, if the matter becomes an offense with the commission, because the commission looks after into civil matters. So once the matter becomes an offense, definitely it shifts to the criminal sides of the matter. So definitely we will have to refer those matters to the Fiji Police Force for prosecution. Now, we also, in terms of our awareness beat, we are reaching out to the communities, to the schools, to the businesses and different demographics through our various projects. And we have also partnered with international stakeholders like Office of the Safety Commission in Australia, NetSafe in New Zealand, Ofcom in UK, and Global Online Safety Regulators Network, where learning and sharing is happening. So definitely the Online Safety Commission is learning a lot from these organizations. Having said that, to our point, currently our prioritization is building more people at the Commission, and straight after would be the legislation review onwards. Thank you.
Sorry, I got a little digressed. If you could just repeat the first question. Or was it a comment?
So there were public consultations that happened as a multi-stakeholder approach in Fiji. So I wasn't part of some of the consultation process, but I just wanted to know what were some of the complaints from the public with regards to the ineffectiveness of the Commission.
Okay, so Chadwick and Simon, please feel free to jump in case I may miss something. There was not, well, in my perspective, there wasn't really a complaint, but when we had, because we've had a series of multi-stakeholder meetings with your commission, and you've also had complete visibility into the report, right? We did have, I mean, you did express that the limitations that you just mentioned, those limitations were expressed. But I don't think there was any complaint in particular, because we did not go ask, so the nature of the report, the nature of the research was as such, we did not go and ask people, we did not have, separate research activities stemming out from the questions where we go and ask, what do you think about the Online Safety Commission? So there was no such part of the report. So 100% of the report has been made visible to your office. There's nothing else apart from what you have seen, just to reassure you. So at any point in time, we did not have disappointments from the MEB members expressed within that forum. So before we made all the recommendations valid, when Chadwick declared it as valid, the Online Safety Commission was present and the reports had gone to your office already. So no, there was really no question of us asking anyone, are you happy with the Online Safety Commission?
I think just one thing that came up, as Simon mentioned, that which isn't really complaint against the Online Safety Commission, was that when the Commission, the culture of forgiveness that Simon mentioned, that we heard, that people tend, especially women, tend to not take it, not to give an action to it, or for example, when you try to take further action, or you try to take it further and there is a case of already criminal case to be, or an investigation to be started, I think overall this was the feedback that people do not want to pursue it further. So this, I think these were the main references that were made in this regard vis-a-vis the public's interaction with the Online Safety Commission.
In general, I would say that what we're trying to say is that the Online Safety Commission is a good example of addressing this problem in the Pacific, but that in terms of being effective in terms of prosecutions and convictions and complaints and so on, that a certain number of points could be not exactly improved, but just that this would help make the Online Safety Commission's work better, more effective. And those points were coming from the two members of the Online Safety Commission who were present at the MAB. So they told us directly that when they dealt with the media platforms in Australia, that the people did not understand the culture of Pacific. They told us that people who who rang the Online Safety Commission often did not wish to pursue prosecutions, that they complained, but they didn't want to take that further. And that thirdly, that that obviously, as you said yourself, that it would work better if there were more resources. That last point is obviously the kind of thing that, in fact, all civil society can benefit from. And we know there are limited resources, so it's a question of how that works, and that's a national decision. But those are the points there, and in a sense, the question about the media platforms is a point to the media platforms, but it's their actions that should change. In terms of prosecutions, I think this whole question of the culture in Pacific and gender equality and women's representation, I know that's a very sensitive cultural issue, and I think that is something that it's not something that we can say what to do about it. That's something that you have to decide. Did you want to say anything?
So, just to add on to what Simon said, I think I remember that incident now. So it wasn't not really an incident. So what happened was we were talking about certain predicaments that the commission faced, not just the commission, but all the MEB members. So the underlying principle behind the ROMEX assessment was having the same basic human rights as you practice offline. You should have, your full liberty to be able to practice your digital rights. Okay, so when we had the discussions, we did have some discussions around, our traditional way of forgiveness, but then the law remains. And, if you have been following news, even in Fiji, we've seen statements even made by the Prime Minister where he says that the law remains. We have our cultural aspect there. So these are not really complaints. It is what it is. It really isn't complaints. These are perspectives that we're not in a position to say this is right or this is wrong. These are perspectives of the people, and we respect them. Yeah.
Thank you, Bulavinaka. Amanda from Digicel Pacific. For context, I take care of 5 countries in the region for a telecommunications operator. That includes Fiji, Vanuatu, Samoa, Tonga, and Nauru. So when all of this was happening, I was fortunate to be part of the process, the multi-stakeholder step at least. I do have some comments on the summary, if I could share that. I've also noticed quite a bit of defensiveness going on in the room. Elisabetta, maybe later you can give us a bit of a patia to bring us together. These are good things, by the way. I've taken into consideration Taja's comments. I mean, to begin with, here in the major findings, Tonga seems to be leading in terms of having an act that requires internet service providers to introduce family-friendly filtering. Entirely correct, I can tell you that. It also focuses on the fact that there are only 3 countries, Fiji, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, that have independent regulators. That's also a fact for these 3 markets, these 3 countries, apologies. It very specifically here calls out 2 important mobile telephone companies in the region, yes, Digicel and our competitor. There are also points which I think are very, very important and very valid to have in here around universal access policies. So thank you for including that. And that's a point that we continue to discuss in Vanuatu and Fiji, I suppose in the Solomons as well. The idea here behind what is written in this paragraph, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of speakers today who spoke about funding. The paragraph goes, these facilities are supported by a levy from telco profits, which is redirected towards extending services to unserved areas or in developing meaningful applications for rural or disadvantaged communities. Obviously, fuller detail on how it would be used would be in the national reports. I also see here some very credible sources cited, particularly for Fiji, the Telecommunications Authority of Fiji. They are our regulator, of course. Vanuatu too has a very positive call out in terms of having a national internet governance forum. I note also some observations on when they last met some years ago. But again, factual information, information that would have been conveyed through your on-the-ground multi-stakeholder meetings. Trust and security, something that we've already discussed throughout today. The fact that Tonga and Vanuatu have certs, Fiji does not. These observations are not new. Perhaps the manner in which it's presented this afternoon has been very confronting. So immediately our reaction was to focus on what are they going to tell us to do. But looking at it, it's more observations of what is happening. And I hope that it can be accepted in that way, particularly because it's validated information, validated reporting and an assessment, and an observation, not a complaint. I was in the room that day when the Online Safety Commission was being discussed, and the observation was they're lacking in prosecution powers. But obviously it goes all the way back to resources, legislation that can support you, and maybe having that observation in here will result in some progress towards expanding. Just on the summary for recommendations, regulation is urgently needed, yes, definitely. For satellites, of course, perhaps also for 5G. To the question raised from Dr. Steen in terms of what could be priority for her to take back, or also for the representative from the ministry. I thought that number 5 was very, very important, that access should be a right and a vital service. And I know it'll come back and affect the operators, but the governments must seek to expand access and keep costs as low as possible. We all need that in our Pacific Island countries. Key areas such as online abuse. This is a growing concern, particularly, I'm specifically aware of how much it is a day-to-day in Fiji. So having a recommendation in here to combat that, thank you for putting it in. It mentions here the police, the judiciary, and other authorities should receive training on the implications of online human rights. Also something very factual, we need the training to be able to implement on the ground. In terms of registers, perhaps this is something TAF and RTI can collaborate on. I'm not entirely sure. Dedicated phone numbers for reporting online abuse. I remember having this discussion with Simon. Yes, liabilities and all can be discussed afterwards. The private sector, I'm noting here, number 12, that they need to carefully enlarge the online market. I like the word carefully, because I do think that's important. And then I'm looking at fintech. So to my mind, that's triggering Digicel MyCash and our competitors' e-wallet. Finally, if I could just point out for the government and civil society, number 17, to work closely to improve prosecution of those responsible for online misogyny, child abuse, and hate speech. I know within the summary, the Online Safety Commission is probably the only properly established entity that would do this across these 5 countries. But to have something this broad to say the government should work closely, you know, that could include law enforcement. In Fiji, the Ministry of Communications is taking a progressive step towards addressing this, particularly against pornography. In some countries in the Pacific, Nauru, they've put across an entire ban. I wonder if that's something we can take away for today, for our own countries. And finally, working together to encourage the development of websites and online services in local languages. I like this one because every time I go to a Tonga website, it's in Tongan. But I'm not blessed with the language, but I appreciate and I like the fact that it's promoted on your website to the world, on the internet. I see it too in Te Reo Māori, which is quite good. And again, I think a very positive recommendation. Yeah, that concludes my comments on this summary. Thank you so much, and happy to consider continue discussions.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for picking up on those points and for your valuable contribution to the process of a Fiji report as well. And thanks very much for your feedback. We appreciate that. Do you have any reactions?
Just to add on to what Amanda has said, I think we all know in the House that Amanda by profession is a lawyer. And the report has also been discussed with her immediate supervisor. As I said, all MEB members had 100% visibility into every aspect of the report. That means just because the regulators and the ISPs would perhaps be more concerned with the accessibility segment, but they had full rights and they had complete access to give comments on R, on X. So that was how open the report was to everybody, and it still is. So thank you very much, Amanda, for standing by us and helping us in the process. I mean, I think because you've been part of the process right from the beginning, you have seen how we've evolved, and we are still, learning. Having said that, if I could just become, I don't think I can be impartial when I say this. Even as a Fijian, I would sometimes get territorial when I see something written about my country, that you guys need to do this. Okay. But again, introspective is very important. How are we ever going to improve if we do not, see our current gaps? And we need to work positively towards, reducing the digital divide. And this would perhaps be one of the things, one of the many, many initiatives that many of us are involved in. Thank you very much. Please feel free to raise your comments or.
Good afternoon. My name is Shiri Langakali. I'm a Fijian first, and so I'd probably talk about from the Fiji side stats that were put up earlier. I was really keen to see and really interested in that 2018-2023 mobile access one. So I've been sitting down for the last few hours just researching on what happened in 2018. So Fiji had a mandatory SIM Registration Act in 2010, but it didn't get implemented until like 2021. But in 2018, Vodafone's LTE Lite went into about more than 65 to 85% coverage. But if you're a Fijian, we have Vodafone, we have Digicel, and then we have Inc., which is part of Vodafone. And every time there's a special, people buy all 3 SIM cards, buy a mobile data or calling card for those ones. And so we're always switching until probably that part where you had to make it mandatory. So that kind of background information is useful for something like this. Swaran, I know you, I know your work, and I know that you've worked hard in this report. It's a really good report because it's really hard to get stats around information relating to the Pacific, and this is great. I think that, like my speaker before me, it's probably just been in the way that it's been presented. Some of us are seeing this for the first time, and I'm seeing this for the first time. I'm looking at the summaries. I can identify with a lot of summaries because I've done 3 scoping and analysis projects in the Pacific. There's a part here about online safety for the police. It is taking place because there is a Pacific Island law operators network, and then there is Cyber Safety Pacifica, which is going around and doing trainings in the Pacific for the police. But this entire recommendation here is a sign of how we've all been operating in silos. And it's time that, we're talking about internet governance, we're talking about our region. It's time we come together and we start having discussions. So something that the UNIGF MEG normally does is, if there's a document like this, it gets put out and people start to put comments to this. And, like right now, if you're asking us for comments, we might get a little defensive about what we're seeing about ourselves. But if, we're given time to put our comments, and if there were links to where that data came from and how it came about, that would really work. One of the hats that I'm wearing is with NetSafe New Zealand, and NetSafe received funding to take out online safety content to 5 Pacific Island countries. And it's hard because, every Pacific Island country needs this content, but we've been talking for years about how there's not enough content for our children. But when you get funding like this, and our relationships are with the directors of ICTs, nobody's connecting us to the education people, and the education people are probably not interested in talking to us because they don't have a relationship with us. And with Fiji, I have to associate you with somebody before I'll actually start listening to you. And it's probably like that for the rest of our Pacific Island countries. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that, it comes to the rest of us that are here. We go back home, we take these things like this, we take these discussions, we start having these discussions in our communities. I think Andrew brought up the topic about National IGF in Vanuatu. Vanuatu has a National IGF Secretariat, but I think the Secretariat is away studying in Australia right now. Maybe when he comes back, then they'll start having these IGF events again. I don't know. But again, in the local context, it's really nice to when you're looking at this country data, talking to everybody, and a lot of times it's ICT people that will have the background information. But I want to go back to what NetSafe is doing in the Pacific. It was mentioned earlier that there is no dedicated helpline. One of the work that we're working with Save the Children Fund and another organization trialing out something in Papua New Guinea that we're talking to Tonga women in ICT about is a helpline, because NetSafe has a helpline for New Zealand. And we're getting a lot of calls from Pacific Island countries on online safety issues for the Pacific. But if we start finding places that are not connected to government, maybe a civil society or an office or something that can have something like that, we can train. Again, we have to come away from our silos. We need to start talking to each other. We need to start, projects. If we're not going to be talking to each other, we're going to be overlapping and stepping on each other. So, this is just my takeaway from this. But great report, great recommendations. I look forward to seeing it being published.
Thank you so much for these valuable inputs, which we take on board. I see already Simon taking notes on his draft report, which is the full version. And yes, definitely, we will be sharing the full report for comments and final input. Any other questions, concerns, remarks, objections? Yes, please.
Kia ora tātou, talofa lava. I just really want to congratulate all my colleagues who have spoken this afternoon. I know how difficult it is when you're very passionate about a subject to come and respond. So I'd just like to say thank you. This is obviously very, very important work. And based on what you shared with me earlier, there are only 5 months left to run in this project. However, in spite of the fact that I'm from Internet Aotearoa, Ipurangi Aotearoa Council member, I'm a Samoan, I'm a Māori, I'm actually a member of Pacific IGF. And we all are here, and we all share the same passion for the Pacific and IGF. So I had a quick whip around at afternoon tea, and most of the groups that I spoke to from every country that is mentioned in this report, the 5 and many others, we would like to recommend from this group here that UNESCO actually extend the project of assessing internet development in the Pacific to allow the multi-stakeholders advisory boards from each participant country existing to conduct further talanor so the understandings of the findings, like we have just had this afternoon, is made available to them. So that's a recommendation that I had a quick whip around, and that's something that we would like you to take back to UNESCO, because it is so important that our communities, we are all passionate internet governance people. Our communities have a few steps away from that. So UNESCO, we would like you to take that message back from this forum, that we will be requesting an extension of this project. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you very much. So the extent, if I'm understanding correctly, you're referring to the timeline of the assessment, or are you referring to the bigger project that I mentioned? So the bigger project is led by ILO. The bigger project is the bigger project is implemented by 6 UN agencies. What UNESCO has is a very small part which addresses the IUI assessments in these 5 countries and cultural activities, which is implemented by UNESCO, Samoa, and Fiji offices, the regional office. So unfortunately, the extension of the bigger project does not depend on UNESCO, as it's not a UNESCO project. However, we do appreciate your passion and your expertise, and we couldn't have imagined a better platform to discuss this regional report. That's why we are doing this, and we are grateful to the IGF, Pacific IGF Secretariat for providing this platform. And we will be more than happy to, again, share the bigger report with all of you to have your further input and to see how we can work on this together further. Thank you so much.
Sorry, if I may just add to Teddewick's comments. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your comments. I think it speaks volumes of the need for an assessment, contrary to an audit. So essentially, there's a huge difference between what an assessment does and what an audit does, right? So we are here to identify the gaps and work as a multi-stakeholder committee to to work. We really need to work on our issues so that we can move forward. And I think one of the strongest commitments we have had from all of our member meetings across the 5 countries is everybody is interested in a national IGF. And this was, in fact, thank you for bringing that up, Amanda. It was one of my, I was going to discuss this with Teddewick over a glass of wine. What can you do for us? We want to set up, our national IGF in the countries. So this was going to be a discussion which I had thought about for later tonight. I also wanted to add that Teddewick has also created a dynamic coalition of national authors and MEB members who are going to refine the indicators itself. So even that is work in progress. So whatever the indicators are today, it may not be the same 6 months down the line. Before we only had Rome, now we have Rome X. So it will be, sorry? Sorry? Okay, yes, so the indicators are being refined as well, and there's a dynamic coalition which I'm part of, Doreen is part of. So we are also part of this, this international fora, where we are also trying to improve the assessment itself. Even we have lots of room for improvement, right? So thank you very much for your comments.
And also to add, as Warren mentioned, that these assessments really highlighted the need for the assessments in other countries. I take on board your recommendation and your message with appreciation. And I have I should extend another message that all the countries that want to conduct the similar assessment in their countries, UNESCO is more than happy to guide and support with the process. So anybody is welcome to start the process in their countries. And thank you so much, Swaran, for pointing out the Dynamic Coalition. There is an IGF Dynamic Coalition on Internet Universality Indicators, and you're most welcome to join the Dynamic Coalition and be part of the discussion, whether it's a regional discussion or whether it's an international discussion. We convene at every IGF, global IGF. We also have periodic meetings. And as Swaran said, we do understand that the anything indicators related to the internet and new technologies cannot remain the same, and as technologies advance, we also have a commitment to make sure we have a commitment to our member states to make sure that and the community we provide them with up-to-date tools. And to review and update tools to make sure that they remain timely and relevant at any time. So this is what we are doing for the moment, and we are due to launch the updated and even refined indicators during the IGF, global IGF in Saudi Arabia this year. Thank you.
For example, okay. For example, one of the things, again, that the Pacific study is already influencing that development is around the importance of the environment and how in the Pacific, the IT systems and the internet systems, as I've said, there is the maritime aspect and there's also the disaster recovery aspect. So all of that also is influencing this global discussion through this project and through UNESCO and through the Dynamic Coalition and the further development.
I know it's time, but if you would allow maybe for one more question, Andrew, please.
Hi, I don't know if you guys can hear me properly, but I'm Athena, and I'm from Samoa. I'm here as part of a representative of the Ministry of Health. So I would just like to say, I would just like to commend you in, the producing of these 5 country reports as well as the regional recommendations. Multi-stakeholderism is not an easy thing, and I'm saying in a perspective because usually assessments of this nature, we usually identify either a particular ministry that will spearhead these assessments. And one of the reasons why we usually do that is so that there is ownership and someone that's actually identified to roll out the recommendations. So my question really is, like, with this process of establishing a multi-stakeholder advisory board, is there anything that you will do differently, knowing that you've already rolled out to 5 countries? Is there anything that you would do differently in this process if you were to roll out to other countries? Because what we do see with a lot of multi-stakeholder advisory boards, if you will, is that the representation changes. And sometimes you would attend only one workshop, and then the next time someone else comes, it's a different perspective, and there's some counter conflicting views. And while they're all important, it does add or takes away weight from the recommendations that are eventually put in as summary. And the reason why I also say that is because then limited resources means we can't implement everything within a certain time period. So, I mean, taking that into consideration, is there anything in the process of this multi-stakeholderism that you would change, or I suppose once you roll out to other countries, I suppose? Thank you. I don't know if that made sense, but.
Thank you for the question. I think I should directly speak about Samoa in this case. So if we were to roll out the question, the way I see it, if we were to roll out this same project in Samoa, which I really hope we do, how different would it be? I think, like, see, when I started the whole process, I only got to know about Internet Universality Indicators as a fellow of APR-IGF in 2020. That time I was an online fellow, for obvious reasons. So what I understood about the project back then and what I understand about it today is very different. It has evolved over time. And whatever discussions we are having here today, including the areas where, you know, my colleagues, my Pacific brothers and sisters are refuting, that all that is completely welcome. So we are now acquainted with the process, and the fact that you yourself and all of us here as members of Pacific IGF, as a wider community, are part of this discussion. I think the uptake would perhaps be a little better, because when you go back home to Samoa, and if we were to do the same assessment in Samoa, you already know what the assessment is about. And there's lots and lots of lessons learned. Save was also a part of the MAB member. I don't know why you're supposed to be wearing a different hat right now. Okay, so he was also, Fiji Police Force was also part of the MAB. So many things that we have learned and we've shared with you, when you take it back home, listen, the assessment itself also allows us to be organic. And I am happy to have, you know, separate conversations with you on how that happens. Because as I said, I was not confined to the regular research methods, qualitative, quantitative, and initially the research team was thinking, okay, what is happening? Then we reiterated of the fact that it's an assessment. It's there or it's not. If it's not, let's take some recommendations from the MAB on how we can improve this process. That is all to it, right? So I think it's going to be an evolving process.
The other thing to say really is that in response is that although there is it has to be a certain methodology because that creates a standard, but within that standard there's quite a lot of flexibility. So we have the 100 core indicators and the 300 broader ones. So as we've said already, that allows some flexibility about what is appropriate and what's not appropriate in different countries. And I've seen that in working with Central Asia and African countries who chose different indicators which more reflected their particular issues. The second thing I want to point out, which is that the indicators are in the form of questions. You don't have to have one answer to the question. So on some questions, for example, civil society and government may have different views. That's fine, they have different views. The idea is that the ROMEX will embody the views that are there, so that in looking at the reports, you will get an overall reflection of the different views which are available, which are manifest, let's say, in that country. And then it's for appropriate bodies who have the authority to take the decisions about what to do as a result. The ROMEX assessment, and Swaran was making the distinction, the ROMEX assessment sets the ground. It shows what the playing field is, but it shows it from the technological side, the data side, the policy side, the human rights side. It's all there, and the different perspectives are built in. There is no one answer to one question.
Okay, I think our time is up. If you have any questions, any remarks, or any suggestions, then There's my email address there. I'm the focal point for IUI. For national reports, you know who to turn to. You know Swaran and Doreen. And for Tonga, it's also Mele and Selu. You must know them. If you don't know them, we're happy to, because the name may be similar. So we're happy to share their contact information. So I must say that as we agreed, we will be sharing the reports for not circulation, for your eyes only, including the regional report for your eyes and your feedback only. So you will have 2 weeks to please give us feedback, any feedback that you would like, and we will take it on board and move forward with the publication. I must congratulate and thank, first of all, Doreen and Swaran, and also Mele and Selu for the excellent work done. These assessments were the first in the Pacific, and congratulations on driving this forward so well despite many challenges that were out there. So thank you so much and congratulations for that. And UNESCO has been absolutely honored and delighted to support you all with this journey. And I am thankful to all of the people who supported at the national level and at the regional level supported the process and contributed to the success of this process. And thank you so much, Simon, for your hard work also in guiding and also putting together the regional report and reviewing so many of ROMEX report. Finally, and forgive me if I'm forgetting someone in my thank you speech, huge thank you to Sarai and Andrew for giving us this space to discuss and to have your important feedback. So we're truly happy to be part of this, and thank you so very much, and congratulations on the successful Pacific IGF. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatifik and Simon, Doreen, and Swaran. I think they deserve a big round of applause. Yes. Thank you.